Hello, friend. Thanks for joining me for another book chat. Let's spend some time with Fright by Cornell Woolrich. This book was originally published back in 1950 under the author's pen name George Hopley. I read this hard case crime edition that was published under the author's true name, Cornell Woolrich. And you may recognize the author there as the author of Rear Window, the short story novella that was the base of the Alfred Hitchcock movie Rear Window. So you know we're dealing with a thriller here for sure. This is a noir thriller. This is what caught my attention about this book was its noirish, supposedly noirish aspect. And the definition of noir is elusive, and different people have different definitions. To me, it's more of a mood than it is a definition, and this book's definitely got a noir mood to it. It did for me. This is a crime thriller, or I would say it's almost more of a psychological thriller, although it has crime elements in it for sure, but we are really dealing with the psychology of our main character. So let's talk about spoilers. Before we go too much further, this obviously is a thriller, so it's going to be very easy to give away spoilers. So I'm going to be really careful not to do that because, as usual, my chats on this channel are typically spoiler-free, and this one will be as well. So I will be careful about that. And as a result, this chat might not be too long because I don't want to give away hardly anything about the plot. But let's talk a little bit about it, just so you get an idea of what it's kind of about. Our main character is named Prescott Marshall. As the novel opens, he's 25 years old. It's 1915, and we are in New York City. Prescott's come to the city sort of to make his fortune. He's gotten a job in the financial industry. He's reasonably good looking. He has a good rapport with the elderly clients of this financial institution where he works. And so he's doing okay. He's not making a ton of money, but he's doing okay. So here's the thing about Prescott that I learned really pretty early in the book is that his fate seems to be driven by women in his life. This job he's got, as I said, is pretty good. He got the job through a girlfriend. So she heard about this opening at this financial institution and she told him about it. He got the job. So at this point in the story, he no longer has that particular girlfriend, but he still has this job. So he does have a girlfriend, though, Marjorie. Marjorie is from a wealthy family in New York City that's also socially connected, right? There's a quote here that really describes her. It says, "For she would bring to him the very things he needed most in this particular, highly selective career he had chosen for himself. She had money, and money attracts other money. And she had impeccable social standing, and social standing attracts confidence. She had friends who had money and social standing, and through being her friends, they would eventually become his clients. Though through being his clients, they would attract friends of their own. It was an ever-widening circle working to his advantage." So isn't this how this works, right? Money sort of draws more money, and it really, in this one little paragraph, that really kind of explains that whole sort of phenomenon a lot of times of privilege in the sense of money making more money through connections and, then building up that way. So I thought that was really interesting. Prescott does seem to love Marjorie, even though he's also aware of the benefits would be of marrying her. And this sort of brings us to the third woman that's pivotal to Prescott's fate in this book. Prescott was all ready to pop the question to Marjorie. He got all dressed up. He was supposed to meet her at this really trendy location in Manhattan. And he was going to pop the question there. It was a place called Peacock Alley, and it was part of the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. I guess it was kind of like an alleyway in between two parts of the hotel, and it was a popular place at the time. So he was expecting to meet her there, and so he goes there at the scheduled time, and he waits, and she doesn't show up. So he waits some more. She doesn't show up. He waits some more. So he's just still waiting there, though, and he hears a boy paging him. Now, this is during the time when paging was someone walking around a room saying, paging Mr. Prescott Marshall, paging Mr. Prescott Marshall. So at first he didn't even recognize that this person was talking about him, but then he did, and the guy says, yeah, you have a phone call. So he goes over and gets the phone call, and of course it's Marjorie. Now, as bad luck would have it, Marjorie's family has just received this horrible news that her aunt and her aunt's husband were on the Lusitania, which has just been sunk. Now, remember, we are in 1915. So, obviously, she can't come because everybody's distraught, so she can't come that night. So, he sort of finds himself basically all dressed up with nowhere to go. And he kind of wonders what to do. You know, he could go home. He could go to a movie. Well, I guess in 1915, maybe not a movie. There's other things he could do, but what does he do? What often happens in these kinds of situations is he goes to a bar, and then to another bar, and then to another bar. So eventually, in this night of bar hopping alone, he comes across a young woman. And you might guess what happens here. She ends up going home with him. He wakes up the next day and he remembers actually very little of what has happened. Soon after that event, he does get with Marjorie and ask her to marry him, and she accepts very happily. So it's all set. The wedding date's all set. Now back to this woman that he met on his night of binge drinking. She did not spend her time idly as he was passed out in his apartment, but she snooped around and she found out certain things about him that were important to him that she could use to basically extort money from him. So she hits him up for money, and he gives in and gives it to her. Well, then she hits him up again and again and again and again. So she's blackmailing him basically with this story of how she slept with him that night. Finally, on the morning of his wedding, you know, he's just trying to keep this woman at bay by paying her off and stuff. And it seems to be, he thinks he has it under control. But finally, on the morning of the wedding, something shocking happens. And this shocking event then projects us like a meteor into the rest of the book. The psychological twists and turns of this book, there's a couple of real doozies, especially one at the end that's just a whopper. So it's a ton of fun. But that's all I'm going to say about the plot of Fright, because anything else, you know, you would hate me if I gave away anything else that happened here. Just some general thoughts, though, about the book. So about the setting of 1915. You know, the book was published in 1950, and so the setting's 1950. You know, why would the author do that? I think it's to set up a sort of moral claustrophobia so that the reader gets this, you know, we're put back in 1915 that has a more sort of a tighter, more restricted morality. So this one night stand in the bar, like a reader from today, would definitely think one way about it. A reader in 1950 wouldn't think the same way about it as they would in 1915. The author's not real heavy-handed about showing this, so it's not like he just makes this point that we are in a different time with a different morality, but we can feel we're in a different time with a different morality. So we don't hear it like objectively, like he doesn't say we are in a different time with a different morality. We just feel that we're in, because this is the noir aspect that I mentioned. You know, a noir, I never would have thought about noir being from 1915. Noir to me is kind of a mid-century thing, middle of the 20th century. So 1915 I don't usually associate with noir, but this book does a really good job of putting us in a noirish mood in 1915. So I think that's kind of the reason why. So the other thing I wanted to mention is the title, Fright. So fear, fright. Fear is the primary motivation in this book. It is what we are dealing with throughout the entire thing, is basically fear. I don't think it's guilt. I don't think it's any other sort of major emotion. It is fear that drives our character Prescott from one thing to the other. It seems to me to be the main psychological driving force for Prescott Marshall. Fear makes people do crazy things, foolish things. Fear can make people do horrific things. Fear can make people think that what they're doing is actually the best thing to do. It's actually, they're doing it because of love, or they're doing it to protect or something. But in actuality, they're reacting from fear, and it is a very destructive thing. Fear can become a kind of insanity, and that's where we wind up with, and that's what we wind up with in this book. So fun to read. I read this I just devoured this book because it was so good. I was expecting it, like I said, to be kind of pulpy and, kind of superficial like that. I didn't expect the psychological depth that I ended up finding in Fright. So if you're into that kind of book, check it out. I will close this chat here. My next chat is going to be some science fiction. It is going to be book 2 of the Culture series, The Player of Games. So I will have a chat on that coming up soon. Until next time, take care. Bye.